Hey guys, today I'm going to be talking about the Booker Prize winning novel Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, so if that's something you're interested in, hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature, and the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle, so let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, welcome back. If this is your first time joining us, this is a novel review, a book podcast. My name is Seamus, I am the host. If you are a returning customer, thank you so much. It's great to have you back. Today I'm going to be talking about Penelope Lively's Moon Tiger, which is a fantastic little book. But before we get to that, we always take a moment to reflect on any mantelpiece moments, something to highlight from the week past. And this past week, I took a little weekend trip to Verona in Italy, which is a bit of a literary town for a few reasons. One is the first one being Shakespeare's Two Gentlemen in Verona, which I've never actually read. And I'm just kind of assuming it's set in the same city as Verona. Could be wrong, never read it. But perhaps more famously known for another Shakespeare play, Romeo and Juliet. And yeah, I just wanted to briefly touch upon that. It was a stunning little town for one, not overly crowded with tourists, which is always kind of the paradoxical duality of traveling, is that you don't want the place to be overrun with tourists when you in fact are a tourist yourself. It's kind of that very arrogant thing you want to happen. And it was a very beautiful city in its own regard. In terms of Shakespeare, there wasn't too much in the way of Shakespeare that I found. There is, of course, the famous courtyard, which is the Juliet, I think it's called Juliet's Courtyard actually, where there's Juliet's balcony. Honestly, I mean, I don't know what I was expecting, but I was a bit not let down by it because I wasn't really expecting anything, but it literally is just like a little square and a balcony. You can pay to go on the balcony, but it's kind of one of those things that I imagine that once you're on the balcony, you're kind of like, okay, it's just a balcony. I'm looking down on tons of people just looking up at me, which is kind of interesting. And the other, I guess, amazingly interesting thing is the fact that there is a statue of Juliet and it's metal, and you're meant to rub her breasts for good luck and sort of life and everything. And you just kind of think, did that poor girl not suffer enough? Because basically this statue is I don't know what it's made out of, but it's kind of covered in, I guess you'd say, verdigris maybe, except for her breasts, which are basically polished and look incredibly bright. So yeah, you just think, did that poor girl not suffer enough? Now she's got to suffer in the memory of just rubbing her tits, basically. So, I mean, Verona itself was stunning. Absolutely loved it. Would absolutely recommend it. The food was incredible. The people were so friendly. It's a stunning little old town. And of course, yeah, there's the added bonus of it's where Romeo and Juliet is set. So that was my cool little mantelpiece moment. Got to explore that little town. And yeah, just thought I'd share that with you guys. Housekeeping, as always, if you would like to like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. 5-star reviews, subscribe. There's a duck in the corner there if you're on YouTube. If you click the duck, something amazing happens, so test it out. But yeah, just thank you so much for listening. It's a free podcast, so just enjoy it. And let's get on with the show. Okay, here we go. Penelope Lively's Moon Tiger. I bought this book because I was looking for something kind of short, something brief. It looked quite short. It looked relatively brief. I say that it's around 200 pages. The pages are quite dense, but I was just kind of looking for something really interesting, and I picked up the back of this and read the blurb, and it sounded really interesting. And that is not to say that it is not a very interesting book, but it was not at all what I was expecting from the book itself. Because the premise and the overview that I should do is, it's about this woman called Claudia who is in a hospital bed, and she's old and she is dying. And the blurb makes it out, and what the story is about is it's her sort of remembering her past and writing this big sort of history of the world. And it's sort of, the blurb doesn't go into it beyond that kind of, I guess. And that's sort of what I took from it. Was I thought it was going to be this really large, sweeping novel about her life going through these different transitional periods and all the crazy adventures she took. And I was kind of expecting this like really, I guess, fun and enjoyable story that's, I guess, kind of similar to if you've read like William Boyd's The Romantic, even though I didn't particularly love that book, but it's a large sweeping cradle to grave novel, and he goes on all these weird and wacky and wonderful adventures and does these things. They're sometimes good, sometimes bad. And that's sort of what I was looking for and thought of what this book was going to be. And it is similar to what I've just described in that it's essentially cradle to grave, and that it does go through her life and she does get up to all kinds of adventures, but it's not at all, I wouldn't say it's not fun, but it's not fun in the sense that it's like this adventure. It's actually a very thoughtful and methodical and beautiful book, and it's a really beautiful story, and it's really, really beautifully written. And I think that's probably the strongest part of this story is just Penelope Lively's writing style is just so dreamy and thoughtful and liquid. And I looked her up online because I was like, oh, I've never heard of her, and I'm really enjoying this writing style, and the story is interesting. Turns out this book actually won the Booker Prize in 1987. And again, it's like I've never heard of this book or her. And as I was looking up reviews and stuff, someone described her writing style as syrupy, as in like a golden syrup or maple syrup or something like that. And I think that was just, if you had to sum it up in one word, that would be it. It's just incredibly syrupy. It's gooey. It's oozing, but it's sweet. It's sticky. It's just, what a perfect word to describe it. So that's kind of what the book is about. There will be spoilers because I'm going to read a few quotes, and one of the quotes is on one of the last pages. But I don't think it's really a spoiler in the fact that, well, I mean, she's dying in like the first page because she's in hospital and she's dying. She's reflecting upon her life. And I don't think there's any spoilers because it's not a story where there's sudden jump scares or anything like that. It's just a story about a woman's life and how she interacted with the world and all these different things that went on. So I think I might start by reading a quote just so you can get a taste of how beautiful this writing is and sort of the ideas driving it, and just how beautiful it was. So here we go. So this is literally on page 2. I think it's the 3rd paragraph. And she's just sort of starting to, I guess, sketch out for herself, but for us as the reader, how the story is going to go and sort of what this history of the world is going to look like and how it's going to be quite personal. And she's going to say, my readers know the story, of course. They know the general tendency. They know how it goes. I shall omit the narrative. What I shall do is flesh it out, give it life and colour, add the screams, add the rhetoric, or I shan't spare them a thing. The question is, shall it or shall it not be a linear history? I've always thought a kaleidoscopic view might be an interesting heresy. Shake the tube and see what comes out. Chronology irritates me. There is no chronology inside my head. I am composed of a myriad Claudias who spin and mix and part like sparks of sunlight on water. The pack of cards I carry around is forever shuffled and reshuffled. There is no sequence. Everything happens at once. And I mean, I could go on reading the rest of the story, but it just goes on like that in this incredibly thoughtful, inflective narrative style. But just that idea of like, is it a linear history? Well, we always sort of, I think, perceive our lives as quite linear because we are technically getting older, but she views it as kaleidoscopic. And I really like that idea of kaleidoscopic in that, like, you just shake it and get a different view. And we can do that with our own sort of lives, and how we interpret them, I guess, is just sort of look from a different angle and we'll get a different view and we'll get a different person and we'll see a different life. And even though you can break it up as like, at that time period I was 5 and I liked cars and playing in the dirt, and then I was 6 and I liked trains and I liked playing ping pong or something, I don't know. But you just see you can get it quite linear, but she wants to just have it as this big meshing kind of story, which I guess is one of the major things for this book, because it's told from her memories. We're really experiencing it as this kind of like really vivid, surreal experience as she's looking back. And because of that reason, there's no kind of sequence of events that's linear, because she's just remembering things as she goes. And I'm not saying that in that it's overly chaotic or anything like that, because it's often quite thoughtful and slow, and you get to piece it together at a really nice pace. And it's not like suddenly we cut off a scene halfway and then interject with another random scene. It's nothing like that, but it's just kind of, you get a scene and then you'll get another scene and they won't fit together. And then you'll get another scene and it'll kind of tie to this one, and it all sort of comes together a bit like a puzzle, really, I guess. And it's just this sweepingly, I'm going to say simple but beautiful tale of Claudia's life. And I guess that brings me to the title of the book, Moon Tiger. And that sort of really captivated me when I initially saw the book, because I thought it's an interesting name. It sounds quite interesting, a moon tiger. And it turns out that a moon tiger, and I haven't actually fact-checked this, so don't judge me on that, but a moon tiger is the green coil, the mosquito repellent coil that I'm sure you've all seen, and you light an end and it slowly sort of coils round. And you can actually light two ends because it's two sort of circles sunk into each other, two cylindrical circles sunk into each other, something like that. And they sort of spin side to side and slowly work their way in. And I had no idea what they were called, but had, I guess, always just assumed that they were called something really simple, like mosquito coil or something like that. And it turns out, according to this book, that they're actually called moon tigers, which who came up with that name, and why is it called a moon tiger, and why is no one talking about that a little bit more? Because it's such a weird but fascinating but wonderful name for a mosquito repellent, a bug repellent device. But I sort of love that as soon as she's talking about it in this particular scene. She's in Egypt, and we're deep in her memories at this stage, and we're deeply rooted in a love story that's going on at that stage. And I sort of loved it because it really made me think about how Moon Tiger is, or this book, and what a moon tiger is. It's just like history and memory sort of curling around in smoke, all just working their way to the center, and whatever that center is I guess up to you as a personal person, but it's kind of, I guess, maybe your death. If that's the end of the coil, that's the end of the story, that's the end of this book, is the death. But it's just kind of history and memory opposite each other, just coiling together and never really touching, but always close to each other. And I really kind of liked that as a story. And I was just blown away that it turned out to be the name for a mosquito repellent device. One of my major, I guess, criticisms of the book would be the fact that her writing style is incredibly beautiful. It's like a backhanded compliment, this, but experiencing it as this large, vast memory and sort of rediscovering it or experiencing it as a reader, but as her memory it's just incredibly vivid. And the story is so incredibly rich that you actually want to read a lot faster. But because it's such a well thought out and slow story, you also want to savor it in a way that just makes you want to read incredibly slow as well and take quite a few notes, as I did. And that's sort of my only criticism, is that you really want to rush through it because you really want to know what's happening. But then, of course, it's sort of like the duality of the language versus the story itself. The story is really engaging and you want to rush through it and know what happens and sort of understand how this girl that we meet at the start of the story, Claudia, grows to be this woman who's now in a hospital bed dying. And even though they're quite unremarkable ends, it's everything that happens in the middle that is incredibly important and beautiful. And so you really want to rush through this story. But then, of course, you've just got this language and these thoughts and these ideas and these constant personal inflections upon the world just coming at you out of nowhere that make you just want to read slow and sort of read a paragraph and then stop and like meditate on it for a moment and then just read it again, because you're like, that was incredibly beautiful and well thought out and structured perfectly. And in a lot of ways, again, it's the story is this moon tiger, and that it's incredibly smoky, it's incredibly hot, and it's just such an incredible slow burn as it works its way to this center. And the center is, I guess, in this sense, us and Claudia sitting in that hospital bed waiting to die, essentially. So probably my most favorite aspect of this book was this narrative, this sort of, I guess it's a subplot really, even though it's part of her life, but it's this subplot of Claudia is in Egypt and she's a war reporter in the Second World War, and she meets this soldier called Tom, and he's just a soldier. He's there and he sort of holidays in Egypt. I didn't really understand what he's doing there because I don't understand all the intricacies of World War II and where people were stationed and where they holidayed and all that kind of stuff. But they meet and they start a love affair, and it was just so incredibly rich and so vivid, and you could really just feel sort of the heat and sweat and passion coming from Egypt and this love affair. But I really kind of loved the fact that it made me really focus on, I guess, what memories actually are, and especially this period, because you are reading it as this vast experience of Claudia's life. You get the sense that memories have become this really kind of painful thing, and memories can often be this incredible sort of source of suffering, but because they're memories, you suffer through them alone, and you suffer through them in a really individualistic, private kind of way. And there was a period, unfortunately, tune out now because this, I guess, technically is a spoiler, so tune out now if you do want to read this book. But Claudia, of course, survives. We know that because we're with her years later. But Tom, unfortunately, does not survive, and he is actually killed in the war. And so Egypt becomes this place where they've had this really passionate love affair, and Claudia goes back there years later, and she finds that it's essentially the same, but it's incredibly different. And it's, I guess, really gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching, because you learn how a place can haunt you and how a physical place can haunt you as a person and haunt your memories. But on top of that, also how you can be haunting yourself and your own memories and sort of ransacking your own past for these feelings and emotions that are no longer there, but they're technically there because you can feel them. And that's where the pain and the passion comes from, and the suffering, and how it's all internalized and private. And it's this idea of like a physical place can haunt you, but like you can haunt yourself as just as much, and it's incredibly painful. And I guess I just wanted to finish talking about it by reading 2 quotes, and this is right at the end, and it sort of gave me this, the whole time the book really gave me this, I guess, hopeful aspect and an outlook on memories, and then it kind of crushed me with a little bit in the second quote. But I'll just read this first part, and it's just talking about like how Claudia views Tom now, as Claudia has gone on and progressed with her life for another 40 years, I believe it was, but Tom is obviously left in that year, in that place where he was killed. So this is the quote. "I am twice your age. You are young. I am old. You are in some ways unreachable, shut away beyond a glass screen of time. You know nothing of 40 years of history and 40 years of my life. You seem innocent, like a person in another century, but you are also now a part of me, as immediate and as close as my own other selves, all the Claudias of whom I am composed. I talk to you almost as I would talk to myself. Death is total absence, you said. Yes and no. You are not absent so long as you are in my head. That, of course, is not what you meant. You were thinking of the extinction of the flesh. But it is true. I preserve you, as others will preserve me, for a while." And I'll stop it there because it just touches on this beautiful idea of, and it's an idea I came across sort of for the first time in, I think it was another Booker Prize-winning novel, Shihan Karuna-Talaka's The Seven Moons of Mali Al-Media. And he talks about how once you're dead, your story is no longer yours and it's someone else's. And if I die today and then someone says he was a really terrible person, like there's no one there to defend me, basically. And so it's the idea of you just become what people think of you. And so I was really like, it was such a beautiful scene in how she sort of remembers him. But then it goes on to sort of, it continues on, and it kind of just broke my heart a little bit. So I'll read this second part of the quote now. "You ask me to make sense of it. I can't. Your voice is louder now than the narrative I know, or think that I know. I know what happened next. I know that Rommel was pushed out of Africa and that we won the war. I know all that has ensued. The dispassionate sequence explains, or purports to explain, why the war happened and how it evolved and what its effects have been. Your experience, raw and untreated, does not seem to contribute to any of that. It is on a different plane. I cannot analyze it and dissect it, draw conclusions, construct arguments. You tell me about gazelles and dead men, guns and stars, a boy who is afraid. It is all clearer to me than any chronicle of events, but I cannot make sense of it, perhaps because there is none to be made." And I'll stop it there just because, yeah, again, I could just keep reading, but it was just this really, I thought, almost stripping scene where history is just this, history becomes this untouchable thing of facts. You know, World War II was started in 1940, it finished in 1944, and it sort of becomes this catalogue of facts, and this entire story is about what happens between those facts, you know, the lives, the emotions, the passions that happen between those facts. But then at the end, Claudia is kind of like, well, I can't do anything with this. I can't do anything with this emotion. I can't do anything with it. So it's kind of, it's useless to me. I can't construct arguments. You know, you've told me about gazelles and dead men and guns and stars, but I can't do anything with it. I can't do anything with your experience and my experience because they don't contribute to any further facts of history. And it's this kind of like, I guess, really sad aspect that history is going to happen whether we want to or not, but we're probably not going to contribute to it in a way that our passions and our emotions really matter. And it was just this, like, I was like, oh, this is like the second last page, and you're telling me that now. And it was just kind of like, damn, yeah, I guess at the end of the day, he dies and no one cares about his passions and actions. It's all just about him being a statistic, and he was a soldier that was born here and killed there. And like, that's kind of the end of the narrative of his story beyond the people that remember him. And it was just kind of like, oh, I guess that's where we end. And yeah, it was just kind of like this incredibly thoughtful book. I don't know if I'd reread it, to be quite honest, because I think once is enough. I would definitely, to be fair though, I would definitely reread the section of her and Tom in this love affair in Egypt, because I thought it was just so incredibly beautiful. I definitely would read more Penelope Lively. So that was Moon Tiger. I think I'm going to rate that a 3.8 out of 5. So what am I reading this week? This week I am reading. I'm not actually reading it. It actually just arrived today, actually, so I've nowhere near started it. But it came from my friend in Canada, Hollay Ghadery. I've never actually said her name out loud before, and now that I'm saying her last name, I hope I'm in one of those 3 iterations. One of them was correct. It's her recent publication, Widow Fantasies. It is, my God, it is a stunning book. I mean, the artwork itself is fantastic. It's either oil painting or acrylic, but it's absolutely fantastic. The cover is just incredible paper. It feels so incredibly nice in the hand. And then the pages as well that has been printed on, these pressed pages of paper, are so incredibly beautiful. I love the font as well. I haven't even started reading it, but already this book is, I know it's going to be incredible when I start reading it, but already this book itself is just like this work of art, and it's so incredibly beautiful. It's a book of short stories. The back, it says its stories and Widow Fantasies definitely explore the subjugation of women through the often subversive act of fantasizing. It goes on from there, but I'll leave it at that. So it sounds really deep, really rich, really interesting. Given the fact that it's tons of short stories, I'm sure it's incredibly varied, which is always fun. I absolutely cannot wait to start reading this. So yeah, Widow Fantasies, Hollay. Sorry, I can't pronounce your last name. Ghadery. If you have listened this far, please consider hitting those 5 stars. I would really appreciate it. Also, feel free to head along to the website and support the pod. And of course, as always, just thank you for your attention. So today, to take you away, I'm going to read the dedication. It's not the dedication, it's the opening quote to the book Widow Fantasies. And I want to read it because it was incredibly nice. And it's from When in Pompeii by Sarah Bernard. And it says, I can't save all of myself, but perhaps what is most precious might be, perhaps preserved.